She sat behind me on the night train, breathing softly. Her knee brushed mine when the train lurched sideways. "Is this seat taken?" she whispered near my ear. I lied and said no, though my neighbor had left. 3 hours later, she held my hand in the dark. Then her phone buzzed with a name I recognized instantly. My firm's biggest client. My whole life about to unravel. My name is Maya Whitfield, 27. A paralegal in Chicago who spent years pretending my heart wanted something it never actually did. That November night, boarding an Amtrak to New York for my sister's wedding, I never imagined a stranger's laugh would rearrange everything I believed about myself. The train pulled out of Union Station just after 11, rain streaking the windows, the city lights smearing into gold ribbons behind us. I had claimed the window seat out of habit, expecting to spend the ride grading my own exhaustion instead of talking to anyone. She appeared in the aisle holding a battered leather duffel, apologizing for the noise, asking if the seat beside me was free. Up close she had paint-stained fingers, cropped dark hair, and eyes that studied me like she already knew something I didn't. "Jordan," she said, offering her hand instead of a last name, and something in her grip made my pulse stumble. We talked about nothing at first: bad train coffee, a dog she'd left with her brother, the wedding she was dreading attending alone. I laughed harder than I had in months, surprised by how easily she pulled honesty out of me in the space of an hour. Somewhere past Cleveland, the lights dimmed, and she tucked her knees up, resting her head near my shoulder without asking permission. I didn't move away. I told myself it was exhaustion, though my whole body felt suddenly, dangerously awake. "You have kind eyes," she murmured, half asleep. And I spent the next hour wide awake, replaying those 4 words. By sunrise, our fingers had somehow found each other beneath her jacket, and neither of us mentioned it, as if silence made it safer. When the train slowed into Penn Station, she scrawled her number on a coffee receipt and pressed it into my palm like a secret. "Call me before you disappear back into your spreadsheets," she said, grinning, and walked off into the crowd without looking back. I stood frozen on the platform, receipt in hand, feeling more unsettled by a stranger than I had by anyone in years. I told myself I wouldn't call. I told myself a lot of things that week that turned out to be lies. For days later, unable to stop thinking about her laugh, I texted a single line. "Coffee, if you're still in the city." She replied in under a minute with an address in Brooklyn and 3 words that made my stomach flip. "Been waiting. Chicago girl." The cafe was small, cluttered with canvases, because Jordan Reyes, turned out, painted murals for a living, chasing light across whatever wall she found. She talked with her hands, described colors like they were feelings, and I realized I'd never met anyone so unafraid to want things loudly. I mentioned, carefully, that I dated men technically, though the sentence felt hollow the moment it left my mouth. Jordan just nodded, unbothered, and said, "Technically isn't a feeling, Maya. It's a hiding place." I didn't have an answer for that. We spent that whole afternoon walking the Brooklyn waterfront, and I found myself memorizing the shape of her laugh instead of the skyline. Before I boarded my train home, she kissed my cheek, close enough to my mouth that I felt it for the entire 6-hour ride. Back in Chicago, my apartment felt smaller, quieter, like it had been waiting for me to notice what was missing from it. My best friend Priya asked why I kept smiling at my phone, and I deflected, unwilling yet to say a name out loud. Jordan and I texted daily. Small things at first: songs, sketches, complaints about clients, until the small things became the best part of my day. 3 weeks in, she flew to Chicago for a mural commission, though we both knew the real reason sat somewhere unspoken between us. I met her at the airport with my heart hammering, and when she hugged me, I finally admitted how much I had missed her. That night, walking along the river, she stopped mid-sentence and asked, quietly, if she could kiss me, like the answer actually mattered to her. I said yes before I'd even fully processed the question. And something inside me, long buried, finally exhaled. For the first time in my life, the kiss didn't feel like performance. It felt like coming up for air after years underwater. We didn't define anything that weekend, but we didn't need to. The truth had already settled quietly into my chest. I began finding reasons to visit New York, inventing depositions and conferences, hoarding stolen weekends like they were the only currency that mattered. Jordan never pushed me to explain myself to anyone, but she watched me carefully, like she was waiting for me to trust her with the rest. One night, over cheap wine on her fire escape, she told me about her own family, a father who hadn't spoken to her in 6 years. He found sketches of a girl I loved in college, she said flatly, called me a disgrace and changed the locks the same week. I reached for her hand, understanding for the first time that her ease with herself had cost her almost everything she'd once had. Doesn't it scare you? I asked. Loving so openly after that? She shrugged. Hiding scared me more. It just took longer to feel it. Her words lodged themselves somewhere deep, because I recognized the hiding she described. I'd been doing it gracefully my entire adult life. Back home, my mother called to discuss wedding seating charts and, casually, to ask when I'd bring Tom around again for the family. Tom Whitaker was my college boyfriend turned convenience story, the name I offered whenever someone asked why I was still single at 27. We hadn't dated in 3 years, but my parents assumed a slow, respectable reconciliation, and I had never corrected them. He's a good boy, my mother said, the same sentence she'd repeated since I was 22, as if goodness alone should decide my life. I mumbled something non-committal and hung up feeling the familiar tightness return to my chest. The one Jordan's presence had briefly loosened. That Friday, Jordan asked if she could meet my friends, if I could tell even one person that she existed beyond a receipt and stolen weekends. Pinnock made an excuse about work deadlines, and watched something flicker and dim behind her eyes before she covered it with a smile. Take your time, she said gently, though her voice carried a weight that told me time wasn't actually infinite between us. At work, I discovered, entirely by accident, that Jordan's mural client was Holbrook Development, the same family that funded my law firm's biggest account. Worse, Holbrook's founder, Richard Holbrook, was scheduled to meet my managing partner the following week, with his daughter attending as company liaison. I stared at the meeting invite for a long moment before the name clicked into place with dizzying, unbearable certainty. Jordan Reyes Holbrook. She had never mentioned her father's company, or perhaps she'd assumed, correctly, that I would run if I knew how tangled our worlds already were. When I confronted her, voice shaking, she admitted it quietly. I used my mother's name, Reyes, away from him. I get to just be Jordan. You should have told me, I said, more frightened than angry, imagining every way this connection could detonate my career if it surfaced. Would it have changed anything? She asked. And I hated that I didn't have an honest answer for her. We sat in silence a long time before she finally said, I didn't lie to hurt you. I lied because I wanted, just once, to be chosen without my father's name attached. I understood the impulse even as fear coiled tighter in my stomach. My job, my closet, her father. All suddenly balanced on the same thin wire. We just won't tell anyone how we met, I said. And she agreed, though the plan felt shakier than either of us admitted aloud. At the Holbrook meeting, Jordan and I exchanged the briefest, most careful nod across the conference room. Strangers by every visible measure. 068, my managing partner, David Kessler, praised the Holbrook account as the pillar of this firm's next decade, oblivious to what stood quietly beside it. After work, Jordan found me in the stairwell, breathless, and whispered. That was the hardest 10 minutes of my week, before pulling me into a laugh. We started meeting in careful, quiet ways, her studio after dark, weekend trips to cities where nobody knew either of our names. I told myself the secrecy was temporary, a bridge to somewhere safer. Though bridges, I would learn, don't hold weight forever. 6 weeks into us, Jordan invited me to her gallery opening, her first in 3 years, and asked me to come simply as her guest. I stood in the crowd that night, watching her greet strangers with easy warmth, and felt something crack quietly open in my chest. Pride, terrifying and undeniable. A woman beside me asked if I was with the artist, and for one long second, I almost said yes out loud, in public, without flinching. Instead I said, a friend, and watched Jordan's face fall for half a heartbeat before she masked it with practiced grace. That night, walking home, she finally asked the question I'd been dreading. Am I your secret forever, Maya? Or just for now? I need time, I said, and she nodded, though her silence afterward felt heavier than any argument could have been. I called Priya that week and, hands shaking, told her everything. Jordan, the train, the fear, the wedding conversation looming over all of it. Priya listened without judgment, then said simply, you've been performing your whole life, Maya. Doesn't it exhaust you? It did. It always had. Emboldened, I invited Jordan to Priya's apartment for dinner, our first small step into a life where she wasn't hidden behind excuses. Priya adored her instantly, teasing us both. And for one golden evening, I let myself imagine a future where this felt ordinary. Then my mother called again, this time with dates, insisting Tom join us for Thanksgiving, since you two seem to be finding your way back. I hadn't spoken to Tom in months, hadn't encouraged anything. Yet my family had quietly built an entire future around a man I didn't love. Tell her, Jordan said gently that night. Not for me. For you. You deserve a life that isn't borrowed from someone else's expectations. Promised I would. Eventually. Though eventually had become my most reliable excuse for avoiding every difficult conversation in my life. At the firm, a junior associate named Sarah Kim began asking pointed questions about my New York trips, her curiosity edged with something colder than friendliness. I brushed her off, but noticed her watching me differently afterward, the way people watch something they suspect but can't yet prove. Jordan's father, meanwhile, announced an expansion deal that would triple Holbrook's business with my firm, raising the stakes of secrecy even higher. If anyone connects us, I told Jordan one night, panic rising. It could look like a conflict of interest. It could cost me everything. Or, she said quietly, it could just look like two women who happen to fall in love. Depends who's telling the story. Her optimism cracked something open in me, a flicker of hope that maybe the world wasn't as merciless as I'd spent my life assuming. We spent Christmas apart. She with estranged relatives who barely tolerated her. Me performing normalcy at a table set for a man who wasn't there. My mother asked, again, why Tom hadn't called, and I finally said, quietly, because I don't love him. Mom, I never really did. She waved it off as cold feet, refilled the mashed potatoes, and the conversation ended before it had truly begun, my courage dissolving with it. On the drive home, I cried harder than I had in years, furious at myself for swallowing the truth one more time. I called Jordan from the driveway, voice breaking, and she stayed on the phone for 2 hours, not fixing anything, just staying present. I'm not asking you to blow up your family tonight, she said softly. I'm asking you to stop lying to yourself about what you want. Something shifted after that call, quiet, private, but undeniable. Like a door creaking open after years of being painted shut. In January, Jordan asked me to move a few things into her apartment. Nothing dramatic. Just a toothbrush, a spare sweater. Proof that I stayed. I said yes. And the smallness of the gesture felt enormous. A declaration louder than anything I'd managed to say aloud. We built a quiet rhythm: Sunday breakfasts, gallery openings, late-night calls when the distance between our cities felt unbearable. Jordan started introducing me, carefully, to her small circle of friends, not as a friend, but simply, proudly, as Maya. Hearing my name said that way, without qualification, made something in my chest loosen that I hadn't realized was clenched for years. Sarah Kim, however, wasn't done watching. She followed a thread of expense reports and flight records until my New York trips formed a pattern. One afternoon, she cornered me by the copy machine and said, too casually, "Funny how often you're in New York the same weekends as the Holbrook Gallery openings." My blood went cold, but I kept my face neutral, said something about client relations, and walked away before my voice could betray me. That night I told Jordan, terrified, and she held my hands and said, "Let her find out. I'm tired of us being a rumor." "It's not that simple," I snapped, then immediately regretted the sharpness, watching hurt flash across her face before she hit it again. We argued for the first time, not about love, but about the different costs we were each willing to pay for it. "You get to be brave because your family already lost you," I said, cruelly. "Mine hasn't lost me yet, and I'm terrified of what happens if they do." Jordan went quiet, then said, "That's the loneliest thing you've ever said to me," and left before I could take it back. I sat alone in her apartment that night, replaying my own words, ashamed of how easily fear had turned into a weapon against the person who loved me most. 2 days of silence passed before I showed up at her studio, unannounced, apologizing before she'd even opened the door fully. "I'm sorry," I said. "I was scared. And I made it your fault. That wasn't fair. You didn't lose your family, they lost you. And it cost you everything." She pulled me inside without a word, and we sat on the floor among half-finished canvases until the apology settled into something forgiven. "I don't need you to be fearless," she said finally. "I just need to know I'm not the thing you're hiding from everyone." "You're not," I whispered, and for the first time, I believed it enough to let the words feel like a promise instead of a hope. The following week, Sarah requested a private meeting with David Kessler, our managing partner, citing concerns about client relationship integrity on the Holbrook account. I wasn't in the room, but I heard about it within the hour, my stomach dropping through the floor of the elevator. David called me in that afternoon, his expression unreadable, and asked directly whether I had a personal relationship with anyone connected to Holbrook development. My mouth went dry. Every instinct told me to deny it, to protect the career I'd spent a decade building, brick by careful brick. Instead, unexpectedly, I heard myself say, "Yes, I'm in a relationship with Jordan Reyes. I should have disclosed it sooner, and I'm sorry I didn't." David studied me for a long, silent moment, then said, "The issue was never who you love, Maya. It was the non-disclosure. That's what puts a firm at risk." He placed me on a temporary compliance review, not a termination, but the fear of losing everything still settled heavy and cold in my chest. Sarah, satisfied, avoided my eyes in the hallway, and I realized she hadn't been protecting the firm. She'd simply wanted me gone. Jordan, when I told her, went pale, guilt washing over her face. "This is my fault. My father's name follows me everywhere I go." "No," I said firmly. "It's the fault of a system that made hiding feel safer than honesty. I'm done blaming you for my own fear." That night, for the first time, I posted a photo of us together. Nothing dramatic. Just her laughing beside me on a Brooklyn rooftop. My phone buzzed within minutes: cousins, coworkers, a flurry of hearts and questions, and, eventually, one devastating call from my mother. "Is this true?" she asked, voice tight, And I said yes, bracing myself for the silence that followed like a held breath. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked. And I realized, painfully, that her hurt wasn't only about who I loved, but about how long I hadn't trusted her. "I was scared you'd stop loving me," I admitted, my voice cracking. "I've been scared of that since I was 15 and figured this out." She didn't say much else that call, and I hung up unsure whether I just lost my mother or finally, truly met her. 2 weeks of silence followed, brutal and echoing, while my compliance review dragged on and Jordan tried, gently, to hold what was left of me together. Then, without warning, my father called, voice rough. "Your mother's in the hospital. Come home, Maya." Now isn't the time for pride. I flew to Ohio within hours, Jordan insisting on coming, though I begged her to stay behind, afraid of adding fuel to an already burning house. "I'm not letting you walk into this alone," she said simply, and boarded the plane beside me without asking permission a second time. At the hospital, my mother lay pale against white sheets. A mild stroke, the doctors said. Dress-related. Frightening but survivable with rest and time. She looked at me, then at Jordan standing quietly by the door, and gestured weakly for us both to come closer. "I've had a lot of hours to think in here," she rasped, "about what almost losing everything makes a person finally understand." I braced myself for rejection, for the familiar disappointment I'd spent years anticipating, my whole body rigid with old, practiced fear. Instead, she reached for my hand, then, hesitantly, for Jordan's too. "I don't understand everything," she said, "but I understand almost losing my daughter over my own silence." Tears broke free before I could stop them. Decades of bracing collapsing in one sentence I'd never let myself hope to hear. "I've known since you were 16, she admitted quietly. "I told myself it wasn't real because I didn't know how to survive it being real." "You were afraid too," I whispered, understanding suddenly that her fear and mine had grown from the very same frightened root. "I don't want to spend whatever time I have left afraid of my own daughter's happiness," she said, squeezing both our hands weakly. It wasn't a perfect reconciliation. There were still hard conversations ahead, but it was a door, finally, cracked open toward the light. My father, gruffer, said less, but shook Jordan's hand at the hospital and later, quietly, asked her about her paintings over vending machine coffee. Small gestures, I learned that week, could hold as much weight as grand declarations if you'd spent your whole life starving for either. Back in Chicago, my compliance review concluded with a formal disclosure policy update. Not a firing. David Kessler had quietly advocated for me the entire time. "You're a good lawyer," he said, closing my file. "The firm doesn't need you to hide. It needs you to be honest next time." Sarah Kim transferred to another department shortly after, and though I felt no triumph in it, I finally exhaled a breath I'd held for months. Jordan's father, Richard Holbrook, requested a meeting with her for the first time in 3 years, prompted, we later learned, by news of her mother's passing decades ago resurfacing in an old estate matter. Jordan returned from that meeting shaken, unreadable, refusing to discuss it for 2 full days while I waited, worried. On the other side of her silence, "He apologized," she finally said, voice hollow. 6 years too late, and only because a lawyer told him his estate looked bad without an heir listed. "Do you forgive him?" I asked carefully, and she shook her head slowly. "Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I don't need his forgiveness to be whole anymore." I admired her fiercely in that moment, the way she'd built a life so complete that even her father's absence couldn't hollow it out. Spring came, and with it, my sister's rescheduled wedding, the very event that had started this entire unraveling on a rain-streaked night train. My mother, still recovering, insisted I bring Jordan. No qualifiers. No excuses. Listed plainly on the seating chart beside my name. Are you sure? Asked, and she said, tired but firm. I've spent enough years being sure about the wrong things. Maya. Let me be sure about this. The morning of the wedding. Panic crept back in anyway. Old habits dying slower than declarations ever could. My hands shaking as I dressed. Jordan found me in the hotel mirror, fixing my collar, and said quietly, "You don't have to be fearless today. Just don't disappear on me." "I won't," I promised, and meant it in a way that felt different from every unfinished promise I'd made before. At the reception, my extended family arrived in waves, some warm, some awkwardly polite, a few visibly uncomfortable but civil enough to stay quiet. My grandmother, 83 and famously blunt, looked Jordan up and down and said, "Well, you're prettier than that tomboy. At least." I nearly cried laughing. Not everyone was kind. My uncle made a pointed comment about modern nonsense before my father, uncharacteristically, told him to drop it at his daughter's wedding. I braced for a scene, but my father simply steered the conversation elsewhere. A small, imperfect act of protection I hadn't expected from him. During the toast, my sister, through tears, thanked our family for finally learning to love out loud instead of just quietly enduring each other. I understood then that my honesty hadn't only freed me, it had cracked something open in my entire family, permission none of us had granted before. Jordan and I danced that night, careful at first, aware of watching eyes, until the music pulled us in and the eyes stopped mattering. My mother, from her chair, watched us with an expression I finally recognized as something close to peace. Hard-won and imperfect but real. "I used to think love had to look a certain way to be safe," she told me later. I was wrong. Safety was never the goal. Honesty was. That sentence stayed with me longer than any vow exchanged that day. Quiet, unexpected gift from the person I'd feared the most. Weeks later, Jordan received a job offer in London, a career-defining exhibition tour that would take her overseas for at least a year. She hesitated to even tell me at first, afraid the news would feel like a threat to everything we'd both fought to build. "Take it," I said immediately, surprising even myself. "I'm not going to become the reason you shrink your life. Not after everything." "Come with me," she said instead, eyes wide with a hope she hadn't dared voice until that exact moment. The idea terrified me, leaving my firm, my recovering mother, the fragile new honesty I just built, and I told her I needed time to think. For 2 weeks, I turned the decision over endlessly, weighing safety against the terrifying, exhilarating shape of a life fully chosen rather than inherited. I called David Kessler, half expecting resistance, and instead he offered a remote transition role, 6 months to figure out what kind of lawyer, in person, you want to be. My mother, when I told her, said only, "Don't build your whole life around staying small enough to keep me comfortable. I've done enough damage that way already." Her words undid the last of my hesitation, and I called Jordan that night with an answer I finally trusted completely. "Yes," I said. "Not because I'm running from anything anymore. Because for the first time, I'm running toward exactly what I want." She laughed, disbelieving, then crying, then laughing again, the sound of it filling every quiet corner of my apartment through the phone. We spent the following month packing, saying difficult goodbyes, and discovering that leaving felt lighter when you weren't leaving behind a lie. My father, gruff as ever, helped load boxes into the moving truck and said simply, "Don't be a stranger. Both of you, both of us." I nearly wept in the driveway. The night before our flight, Priya threw a small goodbye dinner, and Jordan's father, unexpectedly, sent a brief, awkward text. "Proud of the woman you've become." Jordan stared at the message a long time before setting the phone face down. "It's not everything," she said. "But it's something. I'll take something." I understood that healing rarely arrives whole. It comes in fragments, imperfect and partial. And you learn to build a life from what actually shows up. At the airport, waiting to board, I thought back to the night train, the receipt scrawled with a phone number, the terrifying leap of one small yes. "Nervous?" Jordan asked, squeezing my hand the way she had that very first night. And I realized the gesture had become our quiet, private language. "Terrified," I admitted, smiling. "But not of you. Never again of you." She kissed my temple. And the fear finally, fully, let go of me. We boarded the plane together. No receipts hidden. No names withheld. No version of myself left folded quietly in a drawer back home. Somewhere over the Atlantic, Jordan fell asleep against my shoulder, and I watched the dark ocean below, thinking of every version of myself I'd finally stopped hiding. 6 months later, my mother visited us in London, hugging Jordan first at the airport, a gesture that would have been unthinkable a year earlier. She toured Jordan's gallery show with genuine pride, asking careful, curious questions about brushstrokes and color, learning a language she'd never studied before. "I have a lot of years to make up for," she told me quietly one evening. "Thank you for not giving up on me while I learned." I told her I never truly considered giving up. I'd simply been waiting, patiently, for the mother I always suspected was underneath the fear. My compliance review closed permanently with a quiet note in my file: model conduct, full transparency, promoted eligibility upon return to Chicago. Sarah Kim. I later heard, had been let go from her new department for an unrelated ethics violation. Proof that dishonesty, eventually, catches up with everyone. Jordan's exhibition, Names We Keep, opened to quiet acclaim, each painting a portrait of someone who'd survived being unwelcome somewhere they once called home. One canvas, unlabeled, showed 2 silhouettes on a train, hands almost touching, a small golden light glowing faintly between their fingers. "That one's not for sale," Jordan told a curious buyer, glancing at me across the gallery. "That one's mine. Ours. Not for anyone else." Standing beneath that painting, I finally understood that courage was never one grand leap, but 100 small, terrified, necessary yes. A year after that first train ride, Jordan proposed quietly. No crowd. No spectacle. Just the 2 of us on a London rooftop at dusk. "I don't need a big gesture," she said, hands trembling slightly. "I just need you. Choosing this. Choosing me. For the rest of however long we get." "Yes," I said. The same word that had rearranged my entire life once already, now rearranging it again into something I finally recognized as home. We married the following spring. In Chicago. My mother crying in the front row. My father, gruffly, walking me halfway down the aisle before stepping back for Jordan to finish it. My grandmother, 84 now, declared it the best wedding this family's ever thrown. And I include my own. The whole room laughed through tears. Priya caught the bouquet and pointed dramatically at her own girlfriend, newly out herself. Inspired, she later admitted, by watching me finally choose honesty. Jordan's father did not attend, though he sent flowers and a card that simply read, "I hope you have what I was too afraid to have." It wasn't forgiveness. It was a start. Standing at the altar, I thought of the girl on that night train, terrified of her own reflection, and wished I could tell her what was coming. That fear doesn't disappear all at once. That love, chosen honestly, is worth every terrified step it takes to finally claim it. That families can break and rebuild. That mothers can learn. That courage is simply honesty practiced one more time than you think you can bear. I am Maya Whitfield Reyes now, A name built from two women who refused, eventually, to keep shrinking themselves for anyone else's comfort. And somewhere in a quiet gallery in London, a small unlabeled painting still hangs, two silhouettes, one golden light, hands finally, fully touching. We built a life neither of us had been promised, out of a single reckless yes on a rain-streaked train headed nowhere safe. It turned out the destination was never New York. It was simply the courage to stop hiding, one honest station at a time. Andy.